Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're not chasing wars, kings, or great empires. Tonight, we're following something far quieter and far more human. Long before weed had a name, before laws tried to control it, before scandals whispered through royal halls, people were already searching for the same thing, a way to soften pain, a way to release pressure,
long before
a way
weed
to
had a name.
survive the weight of rules without breaking them. From ancient herbs burned for calm, to medieval courts where desire learned to hide, to roaring Roman arenas
Be careful what
where
you say.
chaos was
The walls
allowed
have ears
just
tonight.
long enough.
I know, but
and
we must
finally,
discuss the
to
recent
candlelit
events.
rooms
Clear
where
passage.
secrets
Keep
kept
the line
people
moving.
going.
Get your
This is
refreshments
not a
before the
story
games
about
begin.
rebellion. It's a story about
Get
quiet
your wine,
endurance,
cold and sweet.
about how humans bend just enough so life doesn't break. So before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep
Not
history
rebellion,
stories
quiet
help
endurance.
you find peace,
Con người
sleep
bẻ
better,
cong để không
or
gãy.
simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now close your eyes, let the noise of the day fade, and let history softly and slowly carry you toward rest. Long before the word weed ever existed, long before laws tried to name it, long before debates tried to define it, people were already searching for something much quieter and far more human. Not rebellion, not escape, but relief. Because pain existed long before language learned how to explain it. Fear existed long before philosophy tried to reason with it. And sleepless nights existed long before history decided to record them. In the earliest communities, what we now call cannabis was not a statement, not an identity, not a controversy. It was simply a plant among many others, growing quietly, observed slowly, touched carefully, and remembered not for what it represented, but for what it did. It softened the body when labor tore muscles and joints. It eased the breath when cold nights pressed against fragile shelters, and it slowed the mind when fear refused to let sleep arrive. People did not call it smoking. They did not call it medicine. They did not call it ritual. They simply noticed that when certain leaves were burned, when certain seeds were heated, something inside the body changed in a way that felt survivable. Archaeological traces from the first millennium BCE in regions like the Pamirs suggest that ancient communities intentionally inhaled aromatic smoke rich in compounds that altered perception, not for pleasure in the modern sense, but for ceremony, for mourning, for transitions that
Great
required the
spirits
mind
of the
to
stone
loosen
and
its grip
fire,
on pain.
accept this
In these
offering.
moments, the smoke
Guide
was
us
not an
through the
indulgence.
winter.
It was a bridge between wakefulness and rest, between fear and calm, between the living and the memories they carried. Childbirth, for example, was not a medical event, but a communal risk, and any plant that could dull pain without silencing awareness became invaluable, because survival required endurance, not unconsciousness. The same was true
Ancient
for
ones
physical
guide
injuries,
us.
for
Accept
exhaustion
this
after
smoke.
harvests, for the
We
quiet
honor the
grief that
past,
followed
embrace
loss
the
in societies where mourning had no written language. What mattered was not intoxication, but modulation, the ability to soften sensation without breaking connection to the world. And so these plants entered ritual spaces, not hidden corners, but shared fires, slow chants, controlled environments where elders watched carefully, because the goal was not excess, it was balance. This is why it is misleading to project modern conflict backward, because ancient use was not defiance, it was adaptation. When life was hard, the body needed tools to remain present. And when fear was
Breathe
constant,
deeply now,
the mind
steady.
needed permission to
The
rest.
ancestors watch over
There
you.
was no moral
You are
argument
strong,
attached to
sister.
the smoke.
Be strong.
Only observation.
Push, child,
only
push
memory,
with the breath.
Only repetition of what seemed to
spirits
help the
guide you.
community endure
Soon
another
it will
winter,
be done.
another birth, another burial. Over time, these practices traveled quietly, not through conquest, but through migration, trade, and shared necessity, carried not as ideology, but as knowledge. A plant that helped one group survive pain would eventually be noticed by another, and so its story spread without urgency, without headlines, without judgment. What is striking is not how early people used it, but how carefully they did, always bounded by ritual, by social context, by watchful eyes, because ancient societies understood something that modern debates often forget, that altered calm is powerful, and power requires structure. This was not escape from reality. It was a way of staying within it without breaking. And perhaps that is the quiet truth history leaves us with here, that long before arguments about right and wrong, humans were simply trying to remain functional in a world that offered little mercy. They were not asking whether they should feel less pain.
Yes,
they were
the air
asking
is
how
still.
to continue
The
living
hunt should
without
be good.
being consumed by it. And in that question, there was no rebellion, only survival. No indulgence, only care. And no noise,
Look
only
to the
smoke
smoke,
rising
children.
slowly into
It
the
carries
night,
our words to
carrying
the
with
stars,
it the earliest
keeping
human
us connected
desire
to
for
those who
calm.
came before.
As generations passed, the quiet knowledge of calming smoke did not remain frozen in a single place or culture, because early human history was not built on borders, but on movement. People migrated with seasons, with animals, with weather, and with memory. And among the memories that traveled were small observations that mattered deeply.
Knowledge travels
Which
by
plants
trade.
eased pain, which rituals softened grief, and which moments required the mind to loosen its grip on fear. Cannabis, in its many early forms, moved this way.
These
Not
herbs will help
announced,
with the
not
journey.
traded as
Keep
a
them
commodity,
safe.
but carried
Thank you,
as
Elder.
practical
We are
understanding.
grateful for your kindness.
Shared at fires, exchanged
Take these
during
herbs.
long journeys,
They soothe
and
the stomach.
slowly woven into the fabric of communal life.
We thank you for
What
your
is
wisdom.
important here is that its use began to change shape, not in intensity, but in meaning. What started as a personal relief slowly became a collective rhythm, something used not just to soothe the individual, but to stabilize the group.
The smoke is rising
In
now,
many ancient
a gentle
societies,
bridge carrying our
altered
memories
calm
to the
was
stars,
carefully placed
connecting
at the
us
edges
with the
of
old
life.
ones.
Moments
The smoke
of
is a
transition
bridge to
where
memory.
certainty dissolved
As it
and
rises to
anxiety
the stars,
naturally rose.
we remember those who
Birth,
walked this path
death,
before.
seasonal change, initiation into adulthood. These were not abstract events. They were dangerous thresholds, psychologically and physically, and societies needed ways to guide people through them without panic. Smoke became one of those guides, not because it erased awareness, but because it slowed it just enough for the mind to follow. The act of inhaling together mattered as much as the effect itself, because shared rhythm creates safety. Breathing in unison, sitting in silence, watching embers fade. These were signals to the nervous system long before anyone knew such a term existed. Calm was not accidental, it was designed. And this design was
The
not
fire
careless.
keeps us warm,
Elders,
just as the
healers,
old
and
stories
ritual
keep us
leaders
strong.
understood that
We
anything
must remember
capable
them
of altering
always.
perception required
Knowledge that
boundaries.
travels
And
quietly.
so its use was surrounded by story, by timing, by supervision. There were rules.
The
even if they
ancestors
were not
watch
written.
over this path.
And these rules
We
were
carry
not
their
about
stories
morality,
with us.
but about
The
containment.
young ones must learn them
Too
before
much
the next
calm
frost.
could disconnect a person from
Remember
responsibility.
the quiet
And
knowledge.
too little could leave
It is
them
what
trapped
binds
in
us to
fear.
the earth
And so
and
balance
to those who
became
came
the unspoken goal. This is where modern misunderstandings often begin, because we assume ancient people lacked structure, when in reality they relied on it more than we do. Without institutions, structure lived in ritual, and ritual lived in repetition. Over centuries, this repeated calm shaped how communities understood rest, grief, and endurance. It taught them that the mind could be guided, not dominated, and that relief did not have to mean escape. In fact, most ancient uses were deliberately incompatible with excess because excess threatened cohesion. A person who drifted too far inward could not contribute to the group, and survival depended on participation. So altered calm
Breathe
was
into the
always
smoke.
temporary, always
It
contextual,
eases the way.
always followed by return. This
We
rhythm
are with
mattered.
you. Breathe
Calm,
slowly.
then re-entry.
It will be soon.
Softening, then responsibility.
You are strong.
It is also worth noting that as societies grew more complex, not everyone retained equal access to these communal practices. Hierarchies slowly formed, and with them came decisions about who was allowed to step outside ordinary consciousness and when. What had once been shared began, in some places, to narrow. Ritual leaders controlled access, sacred spaces limited participation, and calm itself became a form of power. But at this early stage, the story is still gentle, the smoke is still communal, the intention is still care. And history, at this point, does not speak of control, only of coordination. People were learning
Breathing
slowly
together
that inner
creates
states affected
safety.
outer survival, and that a community that knew how to calm itself was more resilient than one that relied only on force. This understanding did not arrive through philosophy or doctrine, but through repetition, through watching which practices kept people steady and which ones did not. Calm was not abstract, it was measurable in steadier hands, quieter nights, fewer conflicts, and the simple ability to face another uncertain day. And so the smoke remained quiet, woven into life rather than standing against it. But as societies continued to grow, as power concentrated and roles hardened, the question of who was allowed this calm and who was not would slowly change the meaning of relief itself. Because once calm becomes scarce, it becomes valuable, and once it becomes valuable, it begins to attract control. As societies continued to grow, something subtle began to change. Not in the plants themselves, but in the way calm was perceived. What had once been woven naturally into communal life slowly became something watched, something measured, something quietly evaluated. This shift did not happen suddenly, and it did not come from fear of the plan, but from fear of unpredictability. As populations increased and settlements became denser, leaders began to notice that inner states affected outer order. A calm population was easier to guide, but uncontrolled calm could also dissolve urgency, weaken hierarchy, and blur responsibility. And so attention turned not to eliminating altered states, but to supervising them. The smoke that once drifted freely through shared rituals began to feel different when authority entered the circle. Calm was no longer only about relief, it was also about timing, permission, and observation. In some cultures, specific individuals were now entrusted with mediating altered states. Healers, priests, shamans, figures whose role was to step between the ordinary world and the softened one. Their presence reassured the group that calm was still safe, still contained, still purposeful, but it also marked a change. What was once shared by many was now accessed through a few. This did not necessarily reduce compassion, but it did introduce distance. Calm became something you approached through structure rather than something that arose organically. And with structure came authority. Ritual calendars decided when it was appropriate to loosen the mind. Sacred spaces determined where, and designated guides decided how far. These decisions were rarely framed as control, they were framed as care. And often they were. But even care, when formalized, creates boundaries. The result was a subtle reshaping of how people related to their own inner states. Instead of asking what helped them endure, they increasingly asked what was allowed. This shift matters because it marks the beginning of calm as a regulated experience. Not forbidden, but contextualized. Not demonized, but managed. and management always carries intention. In this period, altered calm did not disappear, it became ceremonial. It moved away from daily survival and toward exceptional moments. This made it powerful, but also rare, and rarity changes perception. What is rare becomes special, and what is special becomes guarded. Over time, this guarding created layers of meaning around practices that had once been simple. Stories grew, myths formed, explanations multiplied. Calm became associated not just with relief, but with insight, with prophecy, with connection to forces larger than oneself. These associations elevated its status, but they also removed it from ordinary life, and ordinary people felt that change. The quiet ease that once helped them sleep after labor now required context, approval, ritual framing. Calm was still
When
present,
calm
but it was no
begins
longer
to
entirely
attract
theirs.
control.
At the same time, leaders observed something else. A population that periodically released tension in structured ways was more stable. Controlled calm reduced unrest, eased transitions, and softened the edges of authority. This realization did not come from cruelty, but from pattern recognition. Societies learned that denying relief entirely created fracture, while allowing it without structure created drift. The middle path was supervision, and so calm became something that existed in balance with order. This balance is delicate, and it requires constant adjustment. Too much restriction, and calm turns into secrecy. Too much freedom, and calm loses its anchoring function. Ancient societies navigated this tension intuitively, not through theory, but through practice. They adjusted rituals, modified access, and refined roles. Over generations, these adjustments hardened into tradition. And tradition, once established, feels natural, even when it represents a departure from earlier openness. What we see here is not the loss of compassion, but the rise of systems. Systems designed to preserve stability in an unpredictable world. But systems by nature prioritize continuity over individual comfort. And so, slowly, gently, without declaration, calm began
As
to
the
move
moon
closer
watches
to
over
power.
us,
It did not
so do
become
the spirits
rebellion,
of those
it did
who
not
came
become
before.
crime. It became something to be watched, something to be guided, something that revealed who held authority and who did not. And in this quiet
We walk the
transformation,
path
we begin to
between
glimpse the
worlds,
deeper question that history
shown
will
the
soon
way
ask more
by
directly.
the flame.
If calm must be regulated to preserve order, then who decides when a person is allowed to rest from fear? This question does not yet demand an answer. It simply settles into the background, waiting. Because once calm is no longer equal, it begins to reflect the shape of power itself. By the time early societies reached a certain scale, calm was no longer simply a shared experience drifting gently through communal life. It had become something unevenly distributed. This change did not announce itself with laws or prohibitions. It arrived quietly, through habit, through access, through who stood closest to ritual spaces and who remained at the edges. Calm, once abundant and woven into survival, began to feel limited, not because it disappeared, but because fewer people could reach it in the same way. What had once helped entire communities rest now rested within specific
As the
moments,
days shorten,
specific
we must
roles,
share the
and
stores
specific
fairly.
permissions.
The hunt
This
provides
scarcity
for all.
altered the
And remember
emotional
the warmth
landscape
of
of
day.
society
Listen
in
closely.
ways that were not
These rules
immediately
protect
visible.
our harvest and our
When
lives.
calm becomes
must
rare,
respect the
people
boundaries of
begin
the
to
forest.
notice it more. They wait for it. They associate it with relief that feels earned rather than natural. And waiting changes the relationship between fear and rest. Instead of flowing between effort and release, life begins to stretch. Tension held longer, resolution delayed. This does not create rebellion, it creates endurance. People learn to carry unease quietly, and endurance, over time, becomes a cultural expectation. In this environment, Those who controlled access to calm did not need to enforce obedience loudly. Calm itself became the incentive. The promise of relief, the moment of sanctioned softness was enough to maintain order. This is not cruelty, it is efficiency. Societies discovered that people could tolerate great difficulty if they believed rest would eventually arrive. And so calm shifted fully into the realm of power, not as a weapon, but as a resource, something to be allocated, timed, and framed. Those closest to authority experienced
The fire
it differently.
shares its warmth,
Their calm was
just
woven
as the
into
ancestors
daily life
share
through
their wisdom.
insulation from labor,
These
through
stories
ritualized
birth
leisure,
remembers.
through protected
We remember
spaces
the
where
earth.
fear rarely
sky
entered.
watches.
For them,
We watch
calm
the
was
sky.
not an interruption, it was a background
We are but
condition.
threads in the great
For others,
tapestry woven
calm
by the
became
sky woman.
episodic,
Her
something
wisdom
encountered
flows
only
through
at
the stones
boundaries,
and the fire.
festivals, rites, or rare moments of permission. This contrast reshaped perception. Calm stopped being a shared human baseline and became a marker of position. Yet even as this transformation took place, the original impulse behind altered calm did not disappear. People still needed to soften pain, still needed to quiet fear,
The tension
still
fades.
needed sleep.
The spirit rises.
Communal structures no
We
longer
find
provided
peace in the
consistent
circle of
access.
stones.
Individuals adapted quietly. They carried fragments of old practices into private spaces. They remembered techniques. They passed down knowledge in whispers rather than ceremonies. Calm did not vanish, it went inward. And inward calm is harder to observe, harder to regulate, and harder to erase. This inward turn is important because it marks the moment when calm begins to exist alongside power rather than within it. Not openly opposed, not overtly rebellious, but parallel. People learn to navigate two realities, the outer structure of rules and roles, and the inner space where fear could be softened without permission. This duality did not destabilize society immediately. In fact, it often strengthened it. A population capable of managing its own inner tension is resilient, but it also planted the seeds for future tension. Because when inner calm and outer authority diverge too far, trust thins. People comply, but they do not connect. Order remains, but intimacy fades. History does not judge this moment harshly because it is understandable. Large societies require coordination, and coordination requires systems, but systems inevitably trade intimacy for scale. What matters here is not blame, but recognition. This is the point where calm stops being purely communal and becomes something people must negotiate. Negotiate with tradition, with authority, and eventually with themselves. And as calm becomes something negotiated, it begins to reflect the shape of power that surrounds it. Who rests easily? Who waits? Who carries fear quietly? Who is allowed softness? And who must earn it? These questions do not yet explode into conflict. They remain background tension, subtle, almost invisible, but they prepare the ground for what
Not
comes
chasing
next.
wars,
Because
kings,
once calm
empires.
is uneven, once relief is no longer shared, the experience of power itself begins to change. Power is no longer only about command or force, it is about access to rest. And it is
Long
here,
before
at this
weed
quiet
had a
threshold,
name.
that the story naturally turns, not toward rebellion, not toward collapse,
This stone
but
marks
toward
our
the inner
agreement.
lives of those
Let the smoke
closest
carry
to
our
power.
words to the
Because
ancestors.
if calm has become
We
a
are grateful
resource,
for this
then
peace.
those who live inside authority must learn to manage it differently. And so, without urgency, without noise, without waking the listener, the story gently shifts its focus away from the smoke rising from communal fires and toward the halls, chambers, and private spaces where calm is practiced not as relief, but as survival within power. By this point in the story, calm no longer belongs to the open fire or the shared breath. It has become something quieter, more personal, and more carefully carried. The transformation is not dramatic, and it does not demand attention. It simply settles into daily life, reshaping how people endure without announcing itself as change. What once moved freely through communal rituals now exists in fragments, carried inward by individuals who have learned not to expect relief as a shared guarantee. This inward calm does not replace community, but it compensates for its limits. People adapt not by resisting authority, but by adjusting their expectations of rest. They learn when to soften fear privately, when to hold it longer, and when to release it without witnesses. In this way, calm becomes a skill rather than a gift, a quiet competence developed over time, refined by necessity. This skill is subtle. It does not disrupt order. It does not challenge structure. It allows life to continue without friction. And because it works, it spreads silently. Parents pass it to children through habit rather than instruction. Elders model it through restraint rather than explanation. Calm becomes embedded in posture, in timing, in the ability to wait without breaking. This is not serenity, it is endurance shaped by experience. As this private survival becomes more common, those closest to power begin to experience a different kind of pressure. Authority does not remove fear, it relocates it. Within halls of governance, courts, and administrative spaces, calm is no longer about rest after labor, but about composure under scrutiny. Those who hold influence must learn to remain still while being watched, measured, and judged. Their calm is not soft, it is disciplined. It is practiced in silence, maintained through ritualized behavior, and reinforced by expectation. A leader who cannot regulate their inner state destabilizes those beneath them. And so calm becomes a requirement of power, not a relief from it. This is where the story naturally turns. The same human need that once sought smoke to ease pain now seeks control to manage visibility. The goal is not comfort, but continuity, not rest, but survival within hierarchy. Private calm becomes armor, a way to absorb pressure without revealing vulnerability. And yet, even here, the original impulse remains unchanged. Fear still arises, doubt still intrudes, sleep still hesitates. Power does not eliminate these experiences, it intensifies them. The difference is that within authority, calm must be performed as well as felt. It must reassure others while containing oneself. This dual demand reshapes the inner world of those at the top. Their calm becomes strategic, not deceptive, but deliberate. Every gesture measured, every pause intentional. Over time, this cultivated composure defines legitimacy. People trust leaders who appear unshaking, and so calm, once a shared human need, becomes a signal of control. This shift does not erase compassion, it redirects it. Leaders learn to manage their own fear first, because fear at the center radiates outward. Calm becomes preventative, a way to stop chaos before it begins. And because this approach works, it becomes tradition. Children born into privilege observe it early. They learn that showing strain invites instability, while maintaining calm preserves order. In this environment, altered calm no longer requires smoke or ritual. It is internalized, practiced, rehearsed. The tools change, but the need does not. What began as a communal technique for surviving hardship becomes an individual discipline for surviving power. And in this quiet evolution, history completes the arc of the first chapter. From shared relief to private resilience, from open ritual to inner management, from smoke in the night to stillness behind closed doors. The listener does not need to follow this transition consciously. It is meant to feel natural, because it is. Human societies do not abandon needs, they relocate them. And calm, perhaps more than any other need, adapts to the shape of the world that contains it. As this chapter draws to a close, there is no conclusion to announce, only a gentle shift in focus. The fire fades, the crowd thins, the rooms grow quieter, and in those quieter spaces, new stories wait. Stories not about plants or rituals, but about people who learn to survive not by escaping fear, but by mastering its appearance. This is where the next chapter begins, not with noise, not with conflict, but with composure. Calm, no longer shared, now practiced inside power.
History remembers Lucrezia Borgia as scandal, as rumor wrapped in silk, as a name whispered in corridors long after footsteps had faded. But history often mistakes noise for truth, because scandal is rarely born from excess alone. More often, it emerges where power is tight, choices are few, and survival demands silence. Lucrezia did not live outside the law. She lived entirely inside it, enclosed by expectations, treaties, and marriages that were designed not for her happiness, but for stability. In Renaissance courts, a woman's body was not her own. It was a bridge between families, a seal on alliances, a quiet instrument of negotiation. To exist within such a system required a different kind of calm, not the calm of relief, but the calm of endurance. Unlike the communal rituals of altered calm explored earlier, Lucrezia's world offered no smoke to soften fear, no shared fire to release tension. Her calm had to be internal, practiced daily beneath watchful eyes. From a young age, she learned that visibility was danger and reaction was risk. Every gesture carried consequence. Every word could be repeated, reshaped, and returned with sharper edges. And so she learned stillness, not emptiness, but control. Silence became her first language, not because she had nothing to say, but because speaking too freely dissolved protection. In this environment, marriage was not an escape, it was a passage. Each union rearranged her position within the maze of power, redefining who watched her, who judged her, and who depended on her composure. To outsiders, these marriages looked like privilege. To those inside the court, they were contracts signed on the body. Calm here was not optional, it was required. A woman who broke under pressure threatened more than herself. She threatened alliances, reputations, and the fragile equilibrium of competing interests. And so Lucrezia mastered the art of appearing untouched. This did not mean she felt nothing, it meant she learned where feeling could exist without consequence. Behind ceremony, behind ritual, behind the predictable rhythms of court life, she created space to endure. Rituals mattered because they offered structure. Morning routines, formal audiences, prescribed gestures, these were not empty performances, they were containers for emotion. They allowed fear to be folded into repetition, grief to be carried without announcement, and uncertainty to be masked by elegance. Over time, observers mistook this composure for coldness and restraint for calculation. But restraint is not absence, it is management. And management in environments of absolute scrutiny is survival. The court whispered because whispering was the only sound that traveled safely. Loud emotion invited correction, silence invited speculation, and speculation in turn produced scandal. The irony is that scandal often grows not from transgression, but from compliance. When a person fulfills roles too smoothly, observers suspect hidden intent.
And so Lucrezia's calm became a mirror onto which others projected their fears. They could not imagine endurance without deception because they did not experience power from her position. What matters for our story is not whether every rumor was false or true, but what those rumors reveal about the system that produced them. In a world where women's survival depended on their ability to absorb pressure quietly, calm became misread as guilt. The quieter she remained, the louder the stories became. This is the paradox of power-bound calm. It stabilizes the structure while inviting suspicion. And yet, within that paradox, Lucrezia lived. She navigated ceremonies, fulfilled obligations, and learned to survive without demanding softness from a world that offered none. Her calm was not liberation, it was function. It kept the machinery of court life moving without fracture. And this is where the chapter deepens, because once calm becomes a requirement of survival inside power, it no longer belongs to the individual. It becomes part of the system itself. Those who can maintain it are rewarded with stability. Those who cannot are exposed. The calm that once helped communities endure hardship now helps hierarchies endure themselves. And so, while earlier calms softened pain, this calm contains it. It compresses fear into silence and transforms endurance into appearance. As we drift deeper into the story, the listener need not judge Lucrezia, nor absolve her. Instead, simply notice the shift, from calm as shared relief to calm as internal discipline. From smoke rising freely to composure practiced under watch. This quiet transformation prepares us for what comes next, because while courts whispered and refined their silence, something very different was happening beyond palace walls. The streets, crowded and restless, needed release of another kind. And where power demanded stillness, the public would soon demand noise.
So, to understand how Lucrezia survived, one must let go of the idea that survival always looks like resistance. In the Renaissance court, resistance was loud, visible, and short-lived. Survival, by contrast, was quiet, procedural, and patient. Lucrezia did not challenge the system that shaped her life because the system was not designed to be challenged by someone in her position. It was designed to be inhabited. Law in this world was not merely written decree, but living structure, custom, expectation, ritualized behavior repeated so often it became invisible. To break it openly was to vanish. To obey it too rigidly was to be consumed. And so she learned the narrow space in between, the art of moving without friction. This is what it means to be trapped inside law, not imprisoned by force, but enclosed by function. Every role she played came with boundaries so precise that deviation appeared instantly. Wife, daughter, political symbol, each title carried obligations that left little room for personal truth. And yet, those same obligations provided cover. Within ritual, one could hide. Within ceremony, one could rest without appearing idle. Lucrezia's calm lived in this paradox. She was visible at all times, yet rarely seen. Present, yet unreadable. This unreadability unsettled observers because courts thrive on interpretation. Power watches constantly, searching for intention. When intention cannot be extracted, imagination fills the gap. Rumor grows where certainty fails. And so the court spoke of poison, manipulation, secret desires, not because evidence demanded it, but because explanation was required. A woman who endured without complaint disrupted the expected narrative of fragility. Her calm did not reassure, it provoked. Marriage intensified this dynamic. Each union rearranged alliances, turning her body into a legal document signed repeatedly by men who rarely bore the consequences of those signatures. Divorce, annulment, remarriage, these were not personal milestones, but legal recalibrations. Through each transition, Lucrezia maintained composure not because she was untouched, but because breaking composure would have broken protection. Emotion in such a system was never private. It was evidence, and evidence could be weaponized. This is why silence mattered more than innocence. Innocence requires recognition. Silence requires only endurance. The law did not ask her to be virtuous, it asked her to be useful. Calm became the mechanism through which usefulness could be sustained. Ritual reinforced this endurance. The repetition of gestures, the predictability of schedules, the choreography of court life reduced unpredictability. Predictability lowers fear. When fear is lowered, the mind survives longer under strain. This is not weakness, it is adaptation, and adaptation often looks like compliance to those who benefit from the system. But from inside, it feels like balance, a careful distribution of energy across time. Lucrezia learned when to yield and when to remain still. Yielding too often dissolved authority. Stillness too long invited scrutiny. Survival required modulation. This constant modulation is exhausting, but exhaustion rarely appears dramatic. It settles into posture, into controlled breath, into the absence of sudden movement. Over time, the court mistook this controlled presence for strategy. They assumed calculation because they could not imagine sustained endurance without intent. But endurance does not need ambition. It only needs continuation. The tragedy of scandal is that it collapses complexity into accusation. It simplifies survival into guilt. In doing so, it reveals more about the observers than the observed. Lucrezia became a symbol not because she wielded power recklessly, but because she absorbed it quietly. She did not escape the law, she became fluent in it. And fluency in rigid systems is often mistaken for manipulation. Yet what she practiced was not deception, but alignment. She aligned herself with the rhythms of power so closely that deviation was unnecessary. This alignment preserved stability, but it came at cost. Inner life shrinks when outer roles dominate. Desire narrows. Expression becomes internal. Calm turns inward not as peace, but as containment. This containment is heavy, but it is survivable. And in that survivability lies the key transition of our story. Calm has fully detached from relief and attached itself to performance. To endure power, one must appear unaffected by it. And so Lucrezia's life teaches us not about scandal, but about the quiet mathematics of survival inside hierarchy. How much can be shown? How much must be hidden? How long one can endure before endurance itself becomes identity? The court did not destroy her, it shaped her. And in shaping her, it revealed the cost of order maintained through silence. As this part of the story settles, notice how different this calm feels from the calm of smoke and ritual. That calm softened the world. This calm compresses it. One expands the self briefly, the other contracts it indefinitely. And it is precisely this contraction, this accumulated pressure, that will soon demand release elsewhere. Because while courts perfected silence, cities grew louder, and the streets, crowded with bodies denied composure, would soon discover their own way of breathing.
Inside the court, silence was never empty. It was filled with attention. Every pause was observed, every still expression interpreted, every breath counted against expectation. This constant observation created a unique pressure, one that did not require force to be effective. When people know they are always seen, they learn to regulate themselves more strictly than any law could demand. For Lucrezia, this meant that calm was not merely internal discipline. It was an outward performance shaped by the knowledge that nothing truly private existed. Walls carried sound. Servants carried stories. Even gestures could be translated into intention by those who needed explanations. In such an environment, emotional restraint became a form of armor, not because emotion was forbidden, but because emotion was dangerous when misread. A smile could be interpreted as manipulation. A tear could be interpreted as guilt. Neutrality, therefore, became the safest expression. This neutrality did not protect her from rumor, but it protected her from immediate consequence. It bought time, and time in hierarchical systems is survival. Over years, this pressure reshaped the rhythm of daily life. Calm was no longer something that arrived after effort. It was something maintained continuously to prevent disruption. The nervous system learned not to spike, not to release fully, not to expect relief. This constant containment has a cost. It narrows perception. It flattens emotional range. It turns endurance into habit. But habit is powerful. Habit allows people to function long after conditions would otherwise overwhelm them. Courts depended on this habit. They rewarded those who could sustain it and quietly removed those who could not. In this way, calm became a selection mechanism. Not everyone survived proximity to power. Those who did were not necessarily the strongest, but the most regulated. This is how silence becomes institutional. It is no longer an individual choice. It is a shared expectation enforced by consequence rather than command. Lucrezia's continued presence within the court signaled her mastery of this environment. She learned when to be visible and when to recede, when to speak formally and when to let others fill the space. These decisions were not strategic in the modern sense, they were adaptive. They emerged from constant feedback. Each interaction taught her what the court would tolerate and what it would punish. Over time, this learning produced a calm that looked effortless from the outside, but effortlessness is often the final stage of practice. Observers mistook this practiced composure for manipulation because they could not see the work beneath it. They saw only the result, and results, when unexplained, invite suspicion. This suspicion fed scandal, not because the court needed truth, but because it needed narrative. Silence disrupts narrative. It refuses to explain itself. And where explanation is absent, imagination steps in. Thus, scandal grows in the space silence creates. The paradox is that silence both protects and condemns. It shields the individual from direct attack while exposing them to indirect accusation. For Lucrezia, this meant living within a permanent ambiguity, neither condemned nor cleared, neither fully trusted nor fully rejected. This liminal position is exhausting, but it is also stable. It allows survival without resolution, and survival without resolution is a common state within power. Power rarely resolves tension, it manages it. This management depends on people who can hold uncertainty without collapsing. Lucrezia became one of those people. Her calm absorbed the unresolved questions of the court. It gave the system time to continue. In doing so, it demonstrated a truth that extends beyond her life. That calm inside power is not about peace, it is about load-bearing. It carries the weight of unspoken conflict so that structure does not fracture. This load-bearing calm is invisible when it works. Only when it fails does history notice. And when it fails, history often blames the individual rather than the system. But in Lucrezia's case, failure never arrived dramatically. She did not explode into rebellion or disappear into obscurity. She remained, and remaining under constant observation is itself a form of resistance that does not look like resistance. It is endurance elevated to identity. As this endurance settled into routine, something else happened beyond the palace. The silence that courts required did not remove tension from society, it relocated it. What could not be expressed in halls accumulated in streets. What could not be released through ritualized calm sought other outlets. This is how pressure moves. It does not vanish, it travels. While the court refined stillness, the city learned volume. While power perfected composure, the public perfected release. And so, without conflict, without rupture, the story prepares to move, away from watched silence and toward collective noise, because where calm is constrained, sound becomes necessary, and where survival demands stillness, life elsewhere demands motion.
As the court perfected its discipline of silence, something subtle but profound occurred within those who lived inside it. Calm, once a tool for survival, began to feel heavy. Not because it failed, but because it worked too well. When composure becomes constant, the body no longer recognizes release as necessary. Tension settles into muscle memory. The mind adapts by narrowing focus, conserving energy, avoiding extremes. This adaptation keeps one functional, but it also alters how life is felt. Days blur into ritual. Emotion becomes muted not by choice, but by repetition. For Lucrezia and others like her, calm was no longer an action. It was a state that never turned off. And a state that never turns off eventually becomes invisible. To those inside power, this invisibility is dangerous. It creates the illusion that nothing is happening, when in fact everything is being absorbed. Silence does not erase conflict, it stores it. The court functioned precisely because conflict had somewhere to go, inward. Each person carried their share without display. This made the structure appear smooth, elegant, controlled. But smooth surfaces often conceal strain beneath them. Over time, the absence of release reshaped relationships. Trust became procedural rather than emotional. Loyalty became performative rather than felt. People learned to cooperate without intimacy. This cooperation was efficient but fragile. It relied on everyone maintaining the same restraint. When one person broke composure, the disruption was amplified. This is why courts reacted so strongly to emotional deviation. A single crack threatened to reveal the pressure beneath. And so silence was defended aggressively, not because it was virtuous, but because it was load-bearing. Lucrezia's role within this environment became increasingly symbolic. She represented the ideal of composed endurance, not because she sought it, but because she embodied it. Her continued calm reassured the system that it could persist. At the same time, it intensified suspicion. The more perfectly she fulfilled her role, the more observers searched for hidden motive. This search was endless because the motive was structural, not personal. She survived because survival was required. Yet courts prefer personal explanations. They turn structure into story. They transform endurance into intrigue. This transformation feeds scandal. Scandal becomes the language through which pressure speaks when silence refuses. But scandal does not release tension, it redirects it. It allows the court to talk without breaking composure. Whispering replaces shouting. Rumor replaces confession. This keeps the system intact while giving the illusion of movement. For those living inside it, this dynamic creates a double bind. Speak and you risk collapse. Remain silent and you invite distortion. There is no clean exit. Survival lies in choosing the distortion you can live with. Lucrezia chose silence because silence preserved continuity. It allowed time to pass, and time within power is the most valuable resource. Time allows alliances to shift, memories to soften, priorities to change. Calm buys time by preventing rupture, but buying time repeatedly has a cost. It delays resolution indefinitely. Life becomes a series of managed moments rather than lived experiences. For those at the center of power, this trade-off feels unavoidable. Stability demands sacrifice. The sacrifice is inner richness. What remains is function, and function, when perfected, appears unnatural to those outside it. They project intention onto efficiency. They read meaning into restraint. This is how composed figures become mythic, not through excess, but through absence. Absence of visible struggle invites speculation. Speculation hardens into narrative. Narrative becomes legacy, and legacy often misrepresents survival as choice. Lucrezia's legacy reflects this distortion. History remembers the noise, not the weight that produced it. It remembers whispers, not the silence that made whispering necessary. As listeners, we are invited to slow down here, to notice how calm, when carried too long without release, changes from refuge to burden. This is not a moral failure, it is a physiological and social reality. Bodies and societies both require oscillation, effort and rest, exposure and concealment. When one side dominates, pressure accumulates elsewhere. The court could not release pressure openly, and so it traveled outward, away from palaces and into streets, away from watched silence and into collective sound. This movement is inevitable. It is not rebellion, it is redistribution. Pressure seeks space, and when calm is monopolized by power, noise becomes the property of the public. The story does not condemn the court for this, it simply observes the pattern. Where silence is required, expression migrates. Where composure is enforced, release finds another stage. As this part settles, allow the image of the court to soften. The rituals continue, the silence holds, but beyond the walls, something stirs, not in opposition, but in response. The calm inside power has reached its limit, and history, always patient, prepares the next movement.
By the end of Lucrezia's life, nothing dramatic needed to happen for her story to be complete. There was no single moment of collapse, no public confession, no final revelation that resolved the whispers. Her survival was not marked by escape, but by continuity. And continuity inside power is the clearest signal of success. She remained composed long enough for the system to move on, long enough for alliances to change, long enough for memory to blur. This is how survival inside hierarchy often ends, not with clarity, but with quiet persistence. The court did not reward her with peace, it rewarded her with endurance. Calm, in this final form, was no longer a response to fear, it was the environment in which fear existed without expression. For those who lived inside this world, stillness became second nature. The body learned how to appear unaffected. The face learned neutrality. The voice learned restraint. Over time, these learned behaviors ceased to feel artificial. They became identity. And when calm becomes identity, it is no longer something you choose, it is something you are expected to maintain for others. This expectation extends beyond individuals. It becomes cultural. Courts teach stillness. They train people to move carefully, speak selectively, and feel privately. This training does not require instruction. It is absorbed through observation. Newcomers learn quickly which emotions are safe and which are dangerous. Fear is acceptable if hidden. Grief is acceptable if brief. Joy is acceptable if controlled. Anything else risks destabilizing the balance. Lucrezia's life exemplified this education. She did not instruct others in silence, she modeled it. And modeling is more powerful than command, because it makes restraint look natural. Over time, the court's silence became self-sustaining. It no longer needed enforcement. People enforced it themselves. This is the final transformation of calm inside power. It shifts from survival strategy to social norm. Once this happens, silence stops feeling oppressive to those within it. It feels necessary, even protective. But necessity always has a cost. When silence becomes normalized, release must occur elsewhere. Human tension does not disappear when ignored. It relocates. What the court contained, the city expressed. What power compressed, the public expanded. This is not opposition, it is distribution. The same pressure that produced composure in palaces produced movement in streets. As courts refined stillness, cities refined sound. Festivals grew louder. Gatherings became more physical. Public rituals allowed bodies to move, shout, collide, and breathe freely in ways impossible inside power. These spaces did not challenge authority directly, they complemented it. They absorbed excess energy so the center could remain stable. History often treats elite silence and popular noise as separate phenomena, but they are connected parts of the same system. One cannot exist without the other. Lucrezia's composed endurance belongs to the same story as the crowd's roar. Her stillness made room for their movement, and their movement protected her stillness from rupture. This balance allowed large societies to function. Calm at the top, release below. Neither moral nor immoral, simply structural. As we prepare to leave the court behind, notice how natural this transition feels. There is no rebellion, no uprising, just a shift in where human energy is allowed to go. Inside power, it settles into silence. Outside power, it becomes sound. This is not failure, it is adaptation, and adaptation is the quiet engine of history. The listener does not need to remember names or dates here, only the pattern. When calm is required to survive inside power, release will always be created somewhere else. The story now moves gently away from whispered corridors and into open spaces, away from controlled breath and into collective rhythm. Because while courts perfected the art of not reacting, societies perfected the art of feeling together. And it is there, in the noise that power allows, that the next chapter waits, not as chaos, but as structure of a different kind. A place where tension is not hidden, but spent, where voices rise not to threaten order, but to preserve it. This is where the streets begin to speak, and where history, once again, changes its tone. For a few hours, Rome allowed itself to scream. Not in rebellion, not in despair, but in ritualized release. The city did not lose control, it loosened it, carefully, deliberately, and only within boundaries it had designed. At the center of this controlled eruption stood the vast open space of Circus Maximus, a place where the pressure accumulated from streets, workshops, tenements, and crowded homes could finally move outward. Unlike the silence of courts, this space was built for sound. It absorbed shouting, stamping feet, pounding hearts, and transformed them into something useful. The chariot races were not simply entertainment, they were an agreement between power and people, an understanding that human tension, if denied, would find dangerous paths, but if guided, could be spent safely. Rome understood this deeply. The state did not fear the crowd's noise here, because the noise had limits. It had time, location, and ritual. For a short span, hunger could be forgotten, class blurred, and frustration discharged without threatening order. This was not accidental. The architecture itself directed emotion. The long oval track pulled attention forward, preventing inward collapse. The factions, marked by colors, gave loyalty a harmless outlet. The risk of the race allowed fear to surface briefly and then resolve. When a chariot survived a turn, the crowd released breath together. When it crashed, shock replaced private anxiety. These shared reactions synchronized thousands of bodies. Synchrony is calming. It regulates the nervous system at scale. Long before modern language could explain it, Rome practiced it. The screams were not chaos in the true sense. They were rhythm, repeated, expected, contained. This is why the races mattered politically. They produced loyalty without sermons and unity without force. People left exhausted, not angry, drained, not plotting. The crowd had spent what it carried. This spending of emotion preserved stability. Importantly, this release did not challenge hierarchy. Senators still sat above, emperors were still named, the poor still returned to cramped rooms. But for a moment, inequality loosened its grip on the body. Shouting equalized lungs, betting equalized hope. For those hours, Rome breathed as one organism. The state did not suppress this, it sponsored it. Because suppression creates pressure, but permission creates flow. The chaos was allowed precisely so that deeper order could survive. And yet, this permission was fragile. It depended on daylight, on spectacle, on rules enforced by guards and ritual. It was release under watch. Even here, freedom was partial. But partial freedom is still relief. Compared to the total restraint of courtly silence, this space felt expansive. Noise became medicine. Motion became therapy. The city learned that not all calm must be internal. Some calm can be reached through exhaustion, through shouting until the body empties itself, through danger that ends safely. This was Rome's genius. It did not demand constant composure from its people. It scheduled moments when composure could be abandoned without consequence. As the races ended and the crowd dispersed, the streets quieted again. But the quiet was different now. It was earned. The screams had done their work. And so, as we drift deeper into this chapter, remember this pattern. Power does not always rule by force or silence. Sometimes it rules by allowing noise, by creating spaces where chaos is not feared, but framed. The next part of the story will move closer to the crowd itself, to what it felt like to stand among thousands, shouting not because you were angry, but because you were allowed to be human. To stand inside the crowd at the races was to feel the body change before the mind could explain it. The moment you entered the packed stone tiers, your breathing adjusted. Not because you chose it, but because thousands of lungs around you were already setting the rhythm. Sound arrived first, a low, continuous vibration that settled into the chest. Then movement followed, heads turning together, shoulders leaning in the same direction, hands rising in anticipation. In this environment, individuality softened. You did not disappear, but you blended, and blending is deeply calming for a body that spends most of its life braced against scarcity. For many Romans, daily existence required vigilance. Food was uncertain, work was exhausting, space was cramped. The body learned to hold tension as a baseline. At the circus, that baseline shifted. The body was allowed to lean outward instead of inward. Attention moved away from personal survival and attached itself to shared suspense. The race created a single question large enough to replace many smaller anxieties. Who will win? That question pulled worry forward, stretched it along the track, and resolved it in bursts. Each lap reset anticipation. Each turn tightened breath. Each near miss released it. This repeated cycle trained the nervous system differently than silence ever could. Silence asks the body to contain. The race asks the body to discharge. Betting intensified this effect. Even small wagers mattered, not for wealth, but for investment. To place a bet was to place yourself inside the outcome. Hope became tangible, loss became acceptable, because both were shared. Losing alone is heavy, losing together is lighter. Winning alone is fragile, winning together is stabilizing. In the crowd, emotion redistributed itself. Fear diluted, joy amplified, anger diffused. This is why the state tolerated betting despite moral objections. It served a function. It anchored attention and gave stakes to spectacle without turning frustration inward. Poverty did not vanish during the races. Hunger did not disappear, but they stepped back. For a few hours, the body remembered a different posture, upright, forward-facing, reactive without consequence. This memory mattered. It gave people something to return to mentally when days were long and nights were loud with worry. The circus taught the body that release was possible without punishment, that shouting did not always invite correction, that excitement could exist without danger. This recalibration lingered. After the races, people walked home tired but lighter. Muscles loosened, breath slowed, the city settled. The calm that followed was not enforced, it emerged naturally from exhaustion. This is an important distinction. Calm imposed from above creates resistance. Calm earned through release creates acceptance. Rome relied on this difference. It understood that bodies must be allowed to spend energy or they will spend it unpredictably. The circus provided a predictable outlet. But predictability did not mean dullness. Each race carried real risk. Charioteers could die, horses could break. Crashes shocked the crowd into silence before noise rushed back in waves. This brush with danger was essential. It made the release feel earned. Safe danger teaches the body trust. It allows fear to surface and resolve without trauma. Over time, this pattern reinforced loyalty. Not ideological loyalty, but bodily loyalty. The city felt manageable. Life felt survivable. The state became associated not only with rules and taxes, but with moments when the body could breathe freely. This association is subtle but powerful. People rarely remember policies. They remember how spaces made them feel. The circus made Rome feel alive rather than trapped. And so, while the races appeared chaotic, they were carefully placed within the larger architecture of control. Chaos had its hours, its boundaries, its rules. Outside those hours, life returned to structure. This oscillation kept the system balanced. Too much restraint breeds fracture. Too much chaos breeds collapse. Rome allowed just enough of each. As you listen, let the image of the crowd soften. Thousands of bodies moving together, noise rising and falling like breath. For those hours, the city carried its people rather than pressing down on them. This is why the races endured for centuries, not because they distracted from reality, but because they helped bodies endure it. The next part of the story will move even closer into the emotions that surfaced when the race ended and silence returned. Because not all release is loud, and not all calm arrives through stillness. When the final lap ended and the crowd began to thin, something gentle replaced the roar. It was not silence in the absolute sense, but a softer atmosphere, as if the city exhaled together after holding its breath for hours. People moved more slowly now, voices lowered without instruction. The body, emptied of excess energy, returned to a quieter baseline. This transition mattered as much as the noise itself. Release without return would destabilize life. Return without release would suffocate it. Rome understood the importance of this passage back into stillness. As spectators filed out, the streets absorbed them gradually. The sound of footsteps replaced shouting. Conversation replaced chanting. The nervous system recalibrated in layers. For many, this was the moment when personal thoughts resurfaced. Hunger returned. Worry reappeared. But they arrived dulled, less sharp than before. The crowd had taken their edge. This softening was temporary, but temporary relief is powerful. It teaches the body that intensity has an ending, that even the loudest surge eventually resolves. This lesson builds resilience. Without it, stress accumulates endlessly. With it, stress becomes cyclical. The calm after the races did not erase hardship, it reframed it. People walked home carrying fatigue rather than agitation. Fatigue invites rest. Agitation invites conflict. The difference is subtle but decisive. Rome preferred tired citizens to angry ones, not because anger was immoral, but because anger disrupts coordination. Fatigue restores routine. After release, routine feels tolerable again. Tasks regain shape. Work resumes. The city's machinery turns. This is why the state invested so heavily in spectacles. They were not diversions, they were regulators. They reset emotional temperature. The aftermath of noise was where regulation completed itself. In the hours following the races, domestic spaces became quieter. Children slept deeper. Adults spoke less. The day closed gently. This gentleness was not imposed. It emerged organically from the body's need to recover. Recovery is calming. It grounds attention. It narrows focus without pressure. For those who lived crowded lives, this narrowing felt safe. The absence of stimulation after excess is soothing. The city learned to trust this rhythm. Loudness followed by rest, motion followed by stillness. Neither state was permanent. Both were necessary. This understanding shaped urban life. Markets, festivals, and public gatherings were timed to allow recovery. Night followed day. Darkness followed spectacle. The city did not demand constant engagement. It allowed cycles. These cycles reduced desperation. When people know release will return, they endure restraint more easily. This knowledge changes behavior. It discourages impulsive rebellion. It encourages patience. The crowd dispersing after the races was not plotting, it was processing. Each person carried away a slightly lighter load. Even disappointment felt manageable because it had been shared. Even loss felt smaller because it had been witnessed. Shared emotion dilutes its weight. This dilution extended into memory. Days later, when hardship pressed again, the body remembered the surge and its end. Memory of release becomes internal support. It whispers that tension is survivable, that intensity passes. This whisper is quiet but persistent. It stabilizes behavior over time. Not everyone benefited equally from this system. Some lived too far from spectacle. Some labored through it. Some were excluded. But for the majority, these moments mattered. They stitched personal endurance into collective rhythm. They made private suffering feel less isolated. This sense of belonging, even temporary, reduces despair. Despair thrives in isolation. The crowd countered it. As evening settled, lamps lit. The city's noise thinned to murmur. The calm now was different from the enforced calm of courts. It was earned. It carried residue of movement. Muscles remembered effort. Breath remembered shouting. The body rested not because it was commanded to, but because it wanted to. This distinction is central. Calm chosen by the body lasts longer than calm demanded by authority. Rome balanced both kinds. Inside power, stillness was required. Outside power, stillness was negotiated through release. This balance held for centuries. But no balance is perfect. Some forms of release could not exist in daylight. Some tensions could not be spent publicly. As night deepened, another layer of the city awakened, quieter, less regulated, less visible. The story prepares to move there, away from permitted noise and toward hidden relief. Because while the city allowed itself to scream by day, not all needs were met by spectacle. Some sought calm that could not be shared, and those paths waited in the dark. As daylight faded and the city's public rhythm loosened, Rome did not fall silent all at once. Instead, sound thinned, stretched, and retreated into pockets. The great collective body that had shouted together during the races now fragmented back into smaller forms. Families, neighbors, individuals, each carried away a different residue of the day. For some, the exhaustion of release was enough. Sleep arrived quickly. But for others, especially those whose lives offered little control or comfort, the return of quiet exposed something unresolved. Daytime spectacle could drain the body, but it could not address every need. Not all tension is physical. Not all fear can be shouted away. As night settled, the limits of allowed chaos became visible. Rome had carefully defined where and when noise belonged. Outside those boundaries, expression became suspicious. The city expected restraint to return with darkness, yet human need does not follow schedules. When the sanctioned outlets closed, unsanctioned ones quietly opened. These were not rebellions, they were continuations. The same pressure that had found voice in the circus now sought softer paths, paths that did not require crowds or permission. In the narrowing streets and dim interiors, release became private again. Conversation slowed, wine flowed, laughter softened into murmurs. Some sought forgetfulness rather than excitement. Others sought calm rather than stimulation. The body, emptied by spectacle, now wanted something different. It wanted quiet relief. Rome tolerated this unevenly. Public noise was acceptable because it was visible and containable. Private release was harder to regulate. It slipped through cracks. This made authorities uneasy. What could not be seen could not be measured. Yet complete control was impossible. The city relied on a balance between what it allowed openly and what it ignored quietly. Nighttime practices often occupied this ignored space. They did not challenge order directly, but they existed beyond its full grasp. For those who lived at society's edges, night offered a different kind of shelter. It reduced scrutiny. It softened hierarchy. Without the crowd's gaze, people could relax roles they performed by day. The self could contract inward again, but this time not under command, under choice. This choice mattered. It restored a sense of agency lost in both courtly silence and public spectacle. The calm sought here was not communal or performative, it was personal. Sometimes it came through shared stories, sometimes through drink, sometimes through stillness, sometimes through substances that dulled awareness rather than sharpened it. History often treats these practices as moral failings or deviations, but within the broader pattern, they appear as necessary complements. When release is too loud to be constant and calm is too strict to be complete, humans invent middle spaces. The night became such a space. It allowed partial withdrawal without total disappearance. The city did not collapse because of these practices. It adapted around them. Tolerance was uneven, enforcement inconsistent, but the pattern persisted. Day handled the crowd, night handled the individual. Together, they covered the full spectrum of human need. This division maintained stability more effectively than uniform control ever could. As you listen, notice how the energy shifts. The roar of the circus feels distant now. The body remembers it, but no longer needs it. Breath slows. Attention narrows. The city becomes intimate. Windows glow softly. Footsteps echo less. Calm returns in a different form, not earned through exhaustion, but through retreat. This retreat is not escape, it is recalibration. It prepares people to re-enter structure the next day. Without it, pressure would accumulate dangerously. Rome understood this intuitively, even when it refused to acknowledge it openly. The boundaries of allowed chaos protected order, but the spaces beyond those boundaries protected people. This is where the story's tone shifts again, from collective release to private coping, from noise that reinforces hierarchy to quiet that softens it. And in this quiet, practices emerge that will carry us forward. Practices that do not seek spectacle, practices that do not demand permission, practices that answer a simple question: how do you rest when the world watches by day? The answer waits in the shadows, gentle and unresolved. By the time night fully settled over Rome, the city had completed its cycle. Noise had risen, peaked, faded, and transformed into quiet. This was not an accident of daily life. It was a rhythm carefully maintained across generations. The circus did not exist in isolation. It was one movement in a larger choreography designed to keep a vast population emotionally functional. Rome did not trust constant restraint, nor did it tolerate constant chaos. It trusted alternation. The roar of the crowd gave meaning to the silence that followed. The silence gave shape to the roar that would return. This exchange allowed order to persist without crushing the human body beneath it. The chariot races, in this sense, were not entertainment at all. They were a public service. They carried collective emotion through a controlled arc, lifting it just high enough to empty it safely. Without such arcs, tension accumulates vertically. It presses upward until it fractures structures. Rome redirected that pressure horizontally, spreading it across time, space, and shared experience. This redirection protected hierarchy by protecting people from themselves. When release is predictable, desperation loses urgency. When expression has a scheduled outlet, rebellion becomes less necessary. This does not mean Rome was benevolent. It means Rome was observant. It watched what bodies did under strain and adjusted the city accordingly. The allowed chaos of the circus was one such adjustment. But even this solution had limits. It worked best in daylight, under supervision, with thousands moving together. It could not address the quieter tensions that did not seek noise. It could not reach grief carried alone, fear whispered only to the self, or exhaustion that needed forgetting rather than excitement. For those needs, the circus was insufficient, and Rome knew it. That is why the city did not attempt to regulate every form of relief. Some practices were ignored, some were tolerated, some were condemned publicly but permitted privately. This selective blindness was not weakness, it was strategy. Total control invites collapse. Partial control invites endurance. The state managed what it could see and lived with what it could not fully govern. This balance kept the city alive. As listeners, we can sense how this balance felt in the body. After the noise, calm arrived not as command, but as permission to rest. Muscles softened, thoughts slowed, sleep became possible. This was the gift of allowed chaos. It did not fix life, it made life bearable, and bearable is often enough for societies to endure centuries. As the city slept, it carried forward the memory of sound, not as agitation, but as reassurance. The body remembered that it had been allowed to feel openly, even briefly. This memory countered despair. It whispered that intensity had a place, that expression was not always punished, that order could coexist with release. But history is rarely satisfied with one solution. Where one outlet exists, another forms. Human need is layered. And so beyond the roar of the circus and the quiet of the home, other paths of relief emerged, less visible, less communal, less acceptable. These paths did not announce themselves in daylight. They waited for darkness. They answered needs the crowd could not. As Chang 3 closes, the city is at rest. The balance has held for another day. But beneath that balance lies an understanding. Not all calm comes from noise. Not all order survives through spectacle. Some forms of survival require retreat rather than expression. They require forgetting rather than shouting. They require softening rather than release. These forms did not belong to the circus. They belonged to the night. And it is into that night that the story now moves, gently, without rupture, carrying with it the question Rome never asked aloud. What happens to those who cannot find relief where relief is allowed? The stricter the rules, the quieter the secrets. In the 12th century, the French court stood beneath the long shadow of Christian virtue. Public life moved within narrow boundaries, defined by doctrine, ritual, and expectation. Appearances mattered deeply. Faith was not only belief, but performance. The court prayed together, fasted together, confessed together. On the surface, order seemed complete. But beneath that surface, something familiar stirred. The same human tension that had moved through herbs, arenas, and palaces earlier in our story did not disappear here. It simply changed shape. When a society elevates restraint into identity, it must find somewhere to place what restraint cannot contain. In the French court, this pressure did not erupt openly. It whispered. It passed through glances, letters, corridors, and nights. Scandal, as later centuries would call it, was not born from excess. It was born from compression. The court demanded purity not only of action, but of desire. Yet desire does not vanish when unnamed. It folds inward. It seeks shadows. The more virtue was emphasized publicly, the more carefully life was lived privately. This created a culture of double awareness. One life for daylight, another for darkness. Not rebellion, but survival. The church taught discipline as salvation. The court enforced discipline as stability. Together, they shaped an environment where expression had to be hidden to exist at all. The people within this system were not uniquely corrupt. They were human within constraints. And like all humans under constraint, they adapted. Adaptation is quiet. It avoids confrontation. It learns the language of symbols. A touch held too long. A word repeated. A door left ajar. These gestures carried meaning because direct expression was impossible. The court became fluent in implication. Rumor thrived not because people loved chaos, but because information could not travel openly. Silence created its own noise. Whispers replaced speech. Glances replaced declarations. This was not decadence, it was economy. When freedom is scarce, it is conserved. The French court did not explode into disorder because its secrets were shared selectively. Knowledge moved slowly, deliberately. Everyone understood the rules of concealment. Exposure was dangerous, not because morality demanded it, but because the system required coherence. Scandal threatened that coherence. Yet scandal was inevitable, not because people sought transgression, but because they needed relief. Relief from constant vigilance, relief from constant judgment, from being watched by God, king, and community all at once. In earlier chapters, release had taken visible forms. Herbs dulled awareness, arenas burned energy, power reshaped silence. Here, release took the form of hidden continuity. Relationships maintained in parallel, emotional needs met discreetly, desire acknowledged only in fragments. The court did not collapse under this weight. It functioned because concealment became normalized. This normalization is important. When hiding becomes routine, it no longer feels like deception. It feels like maintenance. People maintained their roles by protecting their private lives. They did not see themselves as breaking rules. They saw themselves as making the rules livable. This reframing allowed conscience to remain intact. It reduced internal conflict. The system depended on this reduction. A population at war with itself becomes unstable. A population that can compartmentalize endures. The 12th century French court mastered compartmentalization. Faith remained public. Desire became private. Morality remained declared. Humanity remained practiced. This division did not resolve tension, it redistributed it. Tension moved inward where it could be managed quietly. This management required constant attention. Secrets must be protected. Boundaries must be negotiated. Silence must be chosen repeatedly. This effort was exhausting, but it was familiar. Familiar exhaustion feels safer than unfamiliar freedom. People prefer known strain to unknown risk. The court's scandals, when viewed this way, appear less like failures and more like pressure valves. They released just enough to prevent rupture. Not all were gentle. Some caused harm. Some ended lives. But the pattern itself persisted because it served a function. The function was continuity. As night fell over the court, candles replaced daylight. Spaces shrank. Voices softened. In these smaller worlds, the human body relaxed slightly. The posture of virtue loosened. Breath deepened. This was not indulgence, it was rest. Rest from performance. Rest from surveillance. Rest from being exemplary. The story continues here, not toward judgment, but toward understanding. Because in every age, when escape is forbidden, it does not disappear. It learns to hide. In the French court of the 12th century, whispers were not merely sounds, they were systems. They carried information where speech could not. In a world where confession was public and judgment constant, silence became a currency. Those who mastered it survived longer. Secrets did not move randomly. They followed invisible paths shaped by trust, fear, and mutual dependence. A rumor rarely existed to destroy. More often, it existed to regulate. It warned, it signaled, it reminded. Whispers taught people where the boundaries truly lay, beyond what law and doctrine declared. The court's architecture mirrored this hidden circulation. Corridors curved, chambers nested within chambers. Sound softened as it traveled. Privacy was never complete, but it was partial enough to allow breathing room. In these semi-private spaces, people learned how to release pressure without attracting attention. Emotional needs did not vanish under doctrine, they adapted. Affection found coded gestures, desire found timing, loneliness found listening ears. The night amplified these possibilities. Candlelight reduced distance, shadows blurred hierarchy. In darkness, faces softened, the body relaxed its vigilance. This was not a rejection of faith, it was a negotiation with it. The faithful still prayed by day, they still believed, but belief did not eliminate longing, it disciplined it. Discipline, when sustained without relief, becomes brittle. The court avoided brittleness by allowing softness to exist unofficially. Bedrooms became quieter theaters of survival, not stages of excess, but rooms of compensation. What could not be expressed publicly was balanced privately. This balance did not undermine the system, it stabilized it. People who could tend to their inner lives discreetly were less likely to erupt outwardly. The court preferred contained secrets to open rebellion. Containment reduced unpredictability. It allowed the facade of order to remain intact. Those in power understood this instinctively. Enforcement was selective, punishment was symbolic. Complete purity was demanded rhetorically, not practically. This gap between rhetoric and reality was not hypocrisy alone, it was a safety margin. It absorbed human variance. Without it, the system would have fractured under its own weight. Over time, this pattern shaped behavior. People learned to live in layers, one layer for ceremony, one for obligation, one for survival. This layering required emotional intelligence, knowing when to speak and when to remain silent, knowing whom to trust and whom to avoid, knowing which truths could be shared and which must be carried alone. These skills were not taught formally, they were learned through observation, through mistakes, through loss, through watching others fall. Scandal, when it surfaced, often punished excess visibility rather than the act itself. Being seen mattered more than what was done. This reinforced discretion. The lesson was clear. Relief was allowed only if it remained quiet. This quietness did not mean insignificance. On the contrary, it made these practices central to endurance. They allowed people to continue functioning within rigid frameworks. They reduced despair. They softened edges. They offered moments of warmth in otherwise cold structures. As you listen, notice how this form of escape differs from earlier ones. It is slower, quieter, more internal. It does not surge and dissipate, it seeps and sustains. It does not belong to crowds or ceremonies, it belongs to individuals navigating constraint. This is why history often overlooks it. What leaves no monument leaves little record. But absence in record does not mean absence in life. These hidden escapes were everywhere. They filled the spaces between rules. They kept the court human. And as the night deepened, they carried people gently toward rest, not because life was easy, but because it was momentarily manageable. The whisper, after all, is the sound of something continuing without demanding attention, and continuation is the quiet triumph of survival. As the night deepened, the French court changed character. What had been rigid by day grew porous after dark. Rules did not vanish, but they softened at the edges. Doors closed more gently. Footsteps learned to pass unheard. The spaces where people slept became the most important spaces of all, not because they were places of indulgence, but because they were places where vigilance finally loosened its grip. The court demanded constant awareness, words measured, gestures controlled, belief displayed. Over time, this state exhausts the body. Sleep alone cannot restore what vigilance drains. The mind needs permission to stop performing. Bedrooms offered that permission. In these rooms, roles became quieter. Titles mattered less. Bodies mattered more. Breath slowed. Muscles released. The self contracted inward, away from judgment.
This withdrawal was essential. It allowed people to continue functioning the next day. Without it, the strain would have become unbearable. The so-called scandals of the era often took root in these rooms, but not because people sought danger. They sought relief. Relief from being watched. Relief from being exemplary. Relief from the weight of virtue carried without pause. In the dim light, conversations changed tone. Voices lowered, not from fear, but from intimacy. Silence became companionable. Touch reassured rather than provoked. These moments were not about excess, they were about equilibrium. When the external world demands rigidity, the internal world compensates with softness. This is not decay, it is balance. The Church warned against temptation, but temptation was rarely the goal. The goal was rest, emotional rest, psychological rest. The court's hidden escapes worked because they were quiet acknowledgments, not declarations. This quietness allowed people to return to daylight without resentment. They could resume their roles because they had not been starved of themselves. This pattern echoes earlier chapters, where herbs dulled sensation, where arenas exhausted excess, where power reshaped silence. Here, secrecy restored intimacy. Each method answered the same need through different means, to continue without breaking. The 12th century court did not understand this in theoretical terms. It felt it practically. When discretion failed, chaos followed. When discretion held, stability endured. The lessons were learned through lived experience. Over generations, these practices became normalized. The language of scandal grew, but the behavior remained constant. Stories changed, needs did not. As you listen, allow the pace to slow further. Imagine the court at rest. Candles flicker low, conversations fade. The tension carried through the day dissolves into breath. Nothing dramatic occurs, and that is the point. Survival rarely announces itself, it whispers. In these rooms, rules did not break, they fell asleep. And when rules sleep, people can finally rest.
By the end of the 12th century, the French court had perfected a skill it never formally acknowledged, the art of continuing without breaking. Its scandals were not interruptions in history, they were part of its maintenance. The quieter the escape, the longer the system endured. What appears to later generations as contradiction was, to those living within it, coherence, a way of aligning human need with rigid structure without forcing either to collapse. Across the centuries and across the chapters of this story, one pattern has repeated itself gently. When pressure is constant, release becomes necessary. When release is forbidden, it becomes hidden. And when it is hidden well enough, life continues. People do not seek secret paths because they crave disorder. They seek them because order without mercy exhausts the body and the mind. In the French court, mercy did not come from law. It came from silence, from discretion, from the unspoken agreement that some things would not be named as long as they did not threaten the whole. This agreement was fragile, but it worked. It allowed devotion to remain visible while humanity remained intact. It allowed faith to persist without erasing feeling. It allowed the court to sleep at night and rise again in the morning, ready to perform virtue once more. This is not a story about moral failure. It is a story about human continuity, about the ways people adapt when ideals demand more than bodies can sustain. Herbs softened pain, arenas burned excess, power absorbed silence, and finally, secrecy restored intimacy. Each chapter answered the same question differently. How do you keep going when the world asks too much? History often remembers laws, doctrines, and proclamations. It forgets the quiet adjustments that make those things livable.
But it is those adjustments that determine whether societies last decades or centuries. The French court lasted not because it was pure, but because it was flexible in private while rigid in public. This duality is uncomfortable to name, but it is deeply human. As listeners, we do not need to judge it, we only need to recognize it, because the same pattern appears again and again, even now. When modern life grows too loud, too demanding, too absolute, people seek softer spaces. They do not do so to rebel, they do so to breathe, to rest, to remain whole. And that brings us gently to the end of this journey. Across urbs, courts, arenas, and bedrooms, history repeats one quiet truth. People do not break rules to cause chaos, they bend them to survive. Tonight, you do not need to bend anything. You do not need an escape hidden or allowed. You do not need secrecy, spectacle, or permission. The world is already quiet enough. Your body has listened. Your breath has slowed. The story has done its work. All that remains is rest. Let the rules sleep. Let the day fade. And let yourself drift, knowing that rest is not a failure of discipline. It is how discipline endures. Good night.